We've just been talking about the imaginary. And not surprisingly, the imaginary has its own type of speech, speech that corresponds to it. At this stage in Lacan's career, he calls it empty speech. Empty speech is what you do when you talk about yourself. I'm the kind of person who blah, 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 blah. It's ego speech. It's egotistical speech. It's empty not necessarily because it's shallow. It's empty because it's not full speech. Full speech, at this point in Lacan's career, points to another dimension of human experience. It overlaps with the real, it overlaps with the imaginary, but it's something different. This is the realm of language, this is the realm of law, this is the realm of rules, this is the realm of society. It is the realm of symbols, and the word for this realm is the symbolic. That is primarily what is at stake in chapters 3 and 4 of Seminar 3 here on the Psychoses. Lacan is working toward a definition of the symbolic that for him has a structural thrust. And by that what I mean is, the symbolic for Lacan at this point is a structuring force in the life of language users, which is to say people who speak. To speak is to speak a language. But beyond this language is the structure that this language, let's say, speaks to. The structure that positions people who speak that language into certain relationships with others. Lacan is very clear about this. On page 39 towards the bottom, second line up, speech is always a pact, an agreement. This is a key thing for him in the 1950s, and it gets back to one of the basic definitions of the Greek symbolon. To throw together, sim, together alongside, balion, to throw, symbol. To symbolize something is always to bring two things together, to form a relationship of sorts. Lacan's going to have lots to say about this in the 1950s, but for now what we want to get at is the way that speech derives from language. Language is a structuring force, and the structuring effect of language is to put you into relationships with others, intersubjective relationships, pacts, P-A-C-T-S, implicit agreements. Even if we agree to disagree, even if we can't even agree to disagree, even if all we do is yell at each other, we are still engaged in a certain intersubjective relationship. There is a pact between us by the sheer fact that we are speaking the same language, even if we don't agree. Interesting moves here. Let's see if we can work up to it. At the bottom of page 36, Lacan starts to introduce us to what he refers to as full speech or true speech, speech that points to the symbolic more than to the imaginary, speech that points to something that is unknown to us as egos, versus empty speech, which points to the known aspect of human experience, the egotistical aspect of human experience, all the things we seem to know about ourselves. Let's read at the bottom of page 36. 4 lines up from the bottom. Full speech, essential, committed speech, is based on this structure. We have two exemplary forms of this. The first is fides, speech that gives itself. Here's the example it keeps coming back to. The "you are my woman" or the "you are my master," which means you are what is still within my speech. And this I can only affirm by speaking in your place. This comes from you to find the certainty of what I pledge. This speech is speech that commits you. There's some tough sentences, but as always with Lacan, if you're patient, he'll oftentimes tell you exactly what he means. Next sentence. The unity of speech insofar as it founds the position of the two subjects is made apparent here. The symbolic is the space in which language is housed. And language is the resource upon which speakers draw when they talk with each other. What he's getting at here, though, is another basic role of the symbolic. It has a positioning effect. There's a positionality that comes with using language. The example here is, if I say, "You are my woman," it's that there's a reciprocal assumption here that for you to acknowledge that address is to also acknowledge that I am your man. That's what he's getting at here. When someone says, "You are my woman," what they're asking you to do is to assume a very particular position. It could be a position of possession. It could be a position of partnership. It could be a position of friendship, with or without benefits. You can figure this 100 different ways. When someone says, "You are my woman," though, they are positioning you in a certain space. They're gendering you in a certain space. There's a positionality that comes with this. Remember, he's working on this stuff in the mid-1950s, by the way. You hear a lot about positionality today, but this is from 1954, 1955. This is wild stuff. Actually, 55, 56. I mean, come on. This positionality is the key element here. For you to accept my statement that you are my woman, there's a reciprocal nature about this too. It might be, "And you are mine," or "And you are my man," or "And you are my woman," whatever the case may be. But there's a reciprocal element here that commits you to a certain relationship. You enter into a certain pact when you accept this statement. You also enter into this pact, though, when you break it, when you say, "No, I'm not your woman." Because now you enter into a different relationship. Lacan's point is that when you address another, when you speak, when you mobilize language at the level of speech and address it to another person, and all speech is addressed. When you address speech to another person, you invite them to position themselves in relation to you, and you also invite them to reciprocate, speaking in turn in ways that position you relative to them. This is that pact, that agreement, that fundamental communication that's happening. He goes on to talk about lying in a very interesting passage. And at the bottom of 37, he introduces you to the big O, the big other, capital O, other, which for him at this point means the symbolic. Again, you can look up the symbolic and make some progress here. He says on page 38 that this other, this capital O other, is not a lowercase other. Lowercase, little o other, is that specular image, that alter ego. You also are a little o other to yourself. Your ego is a little other. That's not what he's getting at here with the big O other, the absolute other, he says on page 38, 4 lines down from the top. Absolute, that is to say, that he is recognized, but that he isn't known. The imaginary order is a realm of knowledge. The others of the imaginary are known others, or so you like to tell yourself. The otherness that corresponds to the symbolic is an unknown otherness. That's important here. Absolute, that is to say, that he is recognized, but that he isn't known. Similarly, what constitutes the feint is that ultimately you do not know whether it's a feint or not. Read back on 37 if you want the clue on that. It's essentially this unknown in the otherness of the capital O other that characterizes the speech relation at the level at which speech is spoken to the other. That's a weird, convoluted statement. Let's see if we can make some headway with it. What I'm going to do now is just go through these pages and look for opportunities to discuss further what he means by the big O